What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JBsports back again with another one. The WBO welterweight champion and #1 on my pound-for-pound list, Terrence Bud Crawford, has issued a statement in regards to the WBO ordering that he must face #2 ranked in the WBO and former two-time welterweight champion Shawn Showtime Porter. He basically said that all the elite welterweights have been ducking him for several years. So he basically called out Errol Spence Jr., Danny Swift Garcia, Keith one-time Thurman, and Shawn Showtime Porter. Basically said they ain't want no smoke with him in the welterweight division. And he's just happy that the WBO has enforced and mandated that Shawn Showtime Porter must face him in his next fight. They have 30 days to negotiate a deal and come to agreement between both parties, or the fight will go to purse bid. Bud's basically saying that the WBO had to come in and basically put a gun to Shawn Showtime Porter's head to make this fight happen between himself and an elite welterweight in the division. That's basically what he said, man. He basically called out Errol Spence Jr., Danny Swift Garcia, Keith one-time Thurman, and even Shawn Showtime Porter, who he's likely to face next. It's not a done deal. It's not 100% gonna happen next, but I believe this fight has a 60% chance of happening next. So that's better than 50-50. I ain't, you gotta understand the politics of boxing. Even though this is gonna be his last fight with Top Rank, he's still under Top Rank. That's being Terrence Bud Crawford, and Shawn Showtime Porter is closely aligned to Al Haymon in the PBC. So that's basically where we stand here. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some fights that should have happened but didn't happen due to the fact of the political divisions in boxing. You remember Triple G versus Peter Quillen? That fight was supposed to happen about 4 or 5 years ago. Everybody was looking forward to that fight because you had two guys that had good powers. Both guys had shown to knock out their opponents. Both guys had crowd-pleasing style of fighting, basically. And everybody was looking forward to that particular matchup. You had a guy in Triple G that was pretty much the boogeyman of the division at that time. Then you had a guy in Peter Quillen who had the charisma, and a guy that had put on exciting fights. A guy that was in a fight with Andy Lee. That was a very entertaining fight. That fight ended up being a draw, but he fought a lot of other opponents, and he had always was a fan-friendly fighter. And then he was a guy that did good interviews, and a guy that pretty much did a good job of promoting himself. But that fight did not happen because Al Haymon didn't want it to happen, basically. He pulled Peter Quillen away from that fight because he wanted to put together a big fight for the city of New York between Peter Quillen and Danny the Miracle Man Jacobs. So that's one example. Now the second example is pretty much going the other way. That's Triple G and Sergey Kovalev. My bad, I'm sorry about that. Adonis Superman Stevenson versus Sergey Kovalev. That was going to be a unification fight in the light heavyweight division. Main Events and Kathy Duva pulled Sergey Kovalev away from that fight because they had a deal. They had a contract with HBO, which would allow them not to be able to fight Adonis Stevenson, because if they would have fought that fight would have been on Showtime, which was showing PBC fights. So that fight did not end up happening. So you got two examples of fights not happening because of the political divisions in the sport of boxing. And this fight could go down that same road, could travel down that same path. Hopefully it won't, but that's why I give it 60% chance of happening. Now, Shawn Showtime Porter is going to be going overseas here in the next couple of days. He's going to be going over to Tokyo. He's a boxing analyst for the NBC broadcast that's going to be over there broadcasting the Tokyo Olympics. So he'll be over there working with that. So I don't know if that'll play a part in negotiations, because basically the WBO has ordered that both parties must negotiate and come to agreement within 30 days, or the fight's going to go to a purse bid. So with Shawn Porter being out the country, I don't know what kind of effect they'll have, or if any effect they'll have on the negotiations. I don't think it'll have a big effect on the negotiations. I don't think it'll have a major effect on the negotiations. He's got his trainer/manager, Kenny Porter, who will be involved in negotiations. He got Al Heyman there as his advisor, so he have people in place. He have Tom Brown, who's the promoter of TGB Promotions, who will be involved in the negotiations. So I think he have the people involved, and they'll be keeping him abreast of the negotiations. So I don't think that'll play a major part, but that's just something that you're going to have to know going into this negotiation, that he'll be out of the country, man. So hopefully that won't be the hindrance to the fight getting done. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But that's the news coming from Crawford. He basically made a statement. He basically said he's ready to make that fight happen. A lot of people thought he was ducking Sean Showtime Porter, but I don't think he was ducking Porter. I think he was, you know, pursuing a matchup with Manny Pacquiao. That's a much more lucrative fight. That's a much more legacy-enhancing fight, and he was pursuing that fight. It took him a minute to finally realize that that fight was not going to happen. He had been chasing that fight a couple of years ago, before this past year, trying to make that fight happen, when both fighters was up under the top-ranked boxing banner, and the fight did not get made. Manny Pacquiao went into another direction and fought Jeff Horn and got upset in that fight. And then after that fight, Jeff Horn fought Terrence Crawford. Crawford beat Jeff Horn, and he collected Manny Pacquiao's old WBO welterweight belt. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But the question of the day, the question of this video is, do I think the fight's going to be next between Terrence Bud Crawford and Sean Showtime Porter? And if I had to put some money on it, let me just put it to you like this. If I had to put some money on it, I think it's going to happen next. But I don't think it's going to happen in the way it's going down right now as far as negotiations. Both parties are, said to go into negotiations. Like I told you, they got 30 days to make the fight happen. It's going to purse bid. I don't think they're going to come to an agreement within 30 days. I don't see that happen. I think the fight's going to go to purse bid. And, now you're bringing in other players into the equation that can bid on this fight outside of Top Rank and the PBC. That being Golden Boy Promotions can bid on the fight. Triller can bid on the fight. You got different promoters can bid on the fight. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think the fight's going to go to purse bid. And I think if Al Heyman is able to bid on the fight and win the bid, then I can see the fight happen, under the PBC banner. Either on Showtime. No, it won't be on Showtime. Probably be on. They'll probably try to put that fight as a Fox pay-per-view, because Sean Showtime Porter is closely aligned with Fox, as he's a boxing analyst on Fox, so he won't be fighting on Showtime. But if Top Rank Boxing wins the bid on that fight, and that's going to be tricky in itself, because Bob Arum has shown no inkling to put any kind of absorbent amount of money on the Terrence Bud Crawford, because he's lost money on previous Terrence Bud Crawford fights. In particular, the Amir Khan fight, he lost money on that fight. He lost money on the Victor Postal fight. So I think they'll probably put in a bid, but I don't think it'll be any kind of extravagant amount of money to put on that fight. So that leaves Matchroom Boxing and DAZN and Triller bidding on that fight. I think it could end up on one of those two platforms. And if that's the case, then the fight in all probability will happen. But if any one of the other two guys end up with the fight, and specifically ESPN and Top Rank Boxing, I could see a scenario where Al Heyman and the PBC pull Sean Showtime Porter from that fight and pursue a fight between Sean Showtime Porter and Keith One-Time Thurman, a fight that was being explored and that was released to the public, that it was being explored about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think it was Michael Carpenter or Michael Benson, one of those boxing writers, on their social media page said that both parties were in negotiations. So they probably will still either revisit those negotiations or continue those negotiations between Sean Showtime Porter and Keith One-Time Thurman. And in the article also, it was said to believe before this WBO ordered the fight between Terrence Bud Crawford and Sean Showtime Porter, that Terrence Bud Crawford in all likelihood was going to take on David Avanesian October 23rd on ESPN. That was the fight that was going to get made, and that would be his last fight on the Top Rank Boxing contract, and he could be a free agent and move on and pursue other avenues. So we will see what happens. We will see what transpires in that regard. So if bottom line is Crawford and Porter don't get made, look for Crawford to go ahead with the matchup with David Avanesian for October 23rd or maybe even October 22nd, and then look for Sean Showtime Porter to pursue a rematch with Keith One-Time Thurman. Now, where would that fight take place? I don't think it's big enough for Fox pay-per-view, So I think they would probably put it on a Fox pay-per-view undercard as a co-main event. You know, maybe a co-main event. Maybe I can see it doing that. You know, a possible big fight down the road. You know, at the end of 2021. But I don't see any big fights on the horizon. You got Errol Spence Jr. If he defeats Manny Pacquiao, that winner, you know, he'll be looking for a Terrence Bud Crawford fight. Maybe you could put Thurman and Porter as the co-main event for Crawford versus Spence. But I think that could be a possibility. So that's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different scenarios that could play out. We will see what happens and we will see what transpires. Let me know your thoughts about the statement made by Terrence Bud Crawford in regard to a matchup with himself and Sean Showtime Porter. And let me know your thoughts if you think this fight's going to happen next. And let me know your thoughts if this fight don't happen next. What are your thoughts about Terrence Bud Crawford versus David Avanesian and Sean Showtime Porter? Once again, sharing the square circle with Keith One-Time Thurman. Hit the like button if you like the content of this video and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend, and I holla.